Are there any provisions that is a nice broad question, any provisions you would like to see added to this bill to strengthen our ability to drive down illegal crossings?
May I just make a few remarks, or would that be acceptable?
We have such a limited amount of time.
Yes, I appreciate that.
If you could answer the question, that would be great.
Yes,
briefly, please.
The bill, I welcome it in many respects. I think it's the sort of thing that needed to be done, that is happening. I welcome the coordination across government that is going to take place. I think that the potential cooperation with the EU and EU member states, that's also to be welcomed. The setting up of the Border Security Command and Commander, I think that's all, what can one say? It will be helpful. My only gripe, if I can put it that way, is I disagree strongly about the safety of Rwanda Asylum and Immigration Act being repealed. I think that's a mistake. I also think that the repeal of certain parts of the Illegal Migration Act are also a mistake. But again, that's a personal thing, and I'm happy to explain why in a moment. I wonder whether primary legislation was necessary in order to do a lot of what is happening, but we are where we are. I think that illegal immigration, if I can use the term illegal, but whatever we may call it, there is going to be, if anything, a degree of encouragement by removal of the Rwanda Act, and that I think it is unfortunate. There's a lot of people who are entering the EU. There were 240,000 entering illegally declared last year. A lot of those will end up coming to us. There is no deterrence because once they arrive here, the likelihood is they will be able to stay. I believe that the only deterrence is by restricting arrival, constraining and removing quickly. That will send the right messages. I don't think there's anything in the bill at the moment that would suggest that is going to happen.
Thank you.
That's broadly my view.
Tony and Carl, anything on that?
So, I mean, looking at the clauses sort of in the chunks that they're in the bill, I mean, the first thing, the Border Security Commander struck me as it's going to be another civil servant. I think it's going to be a Director General post in the Home Office. I mean, I was one of those, and we already have quite a lot of those. And I'm not sure that he's actually going to be able to command anything. I think he's probably going to be more a coordinator. I would like to see him and his team have law enforcement powers. So they've got powers to arrest, detain, same as officers have in the Border Force, in National Crime Agency, Immigration Enforcement. I think that whole governance structure does need attention, so it does need someone to pull it all together. But so I'm not sure that we've pitched that right, that post right in immigration law enforcement teams. I think on his reporting requirements that you've put in, I think he does need to regularly publish details of irregular arrivals by way of nationality, age, provide regular updates as to where they are in the process, so that we can all see where, if there are log jams in the process from arrival to either removal or grant, we can check the timelines. I think they've already got a dashboard in the Home Office that does that, so I presume he will be able to take responsibility for that. And I would also like to follow up on the point that Alp Mehmet made about removals and data on removals and the numbers of people who could be excluded currently under the NABA, under National Borders Act, because they've come from a safe third country. That's still there, but we don't know the data of how many of those are actually on a case-by-case being removed. So I would like to see a country list of all the countries that are where we can remove people to, both for safe third countries, for source countries, but also for third countries. Now, we know France won't take, or the EU won't take third country returns. In fact, without Rwanda, I don't think there are any countries that will take third country returns. There are countries that will take their own nationals back, but under this new system where we've done away with SORA and most of the IMA, then there doesn't seem to be a third country option outlet. Therefore, those people that come here from Iran or Iraq or Syria or Afghanistan know on the other side of the channel they need only get in the British territorial waters and they will probably be allowed to stay in the UK, because they maybe well get asylum, but even if they don't, it's impossible to return them for one reason or another. So I'm really interested in that returns piece. I'm really keen on data from mobile devices to be captured. Some of them do keep their mobile phones. That data is being used for prosecution purposes only. I think that should be made available to officials who are considering their asylum. Quite often there's passport data on there, identity data, age data, travel history data, all data that we would really usefully have to consider an asylum application that's being held on those phones. So I think we need legislation to do that, and I would also use mobile devices to track people on bail who are given bail so that we can use the tracker to know where they are in the event of an adverse decision from the Home Office, that we will be able to find them. At the moment we don't have powers to do that because of the Regulatory Powers Act. I would like to see an amendment that enabled that to happen. We know the tagging systems haven't really worked, and in the unlikely event, I don't expect the government will, but in the unlikely event that we were able to keep SORA or the Rwanda plan, then we really need to look, I think, at options for offshoring asylum claims, where we could send people who have arrived from a safe third country, if we can't send them back there, to another safe country, ergo Rwanda, where they could be resettled safely and would not add to the continuing flow of arrivals by small boat, not just by small boat, but from France. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything to add on that, Carl?
Yeah, just two brief points to reinforce what Tony was saying. This bill to me feels like it focuses on disruption and interdiction of routes of entering the country illegally. It doesn't do much on deterrence, and I think, as the impact assessment itself says, on Pillar 3, the changes to measures around going after the gangs, it's very uncertain what outcome this will be. That's because there isn't an evidence base here. The only country that's succeeding in stopping small boats has been Australia. There was some interdiction involved there, working with Indonesia, but primarily it was about the offshoring agreement, which was a major plank of their deterrence. So I'd like to see deterrence measures added into this, not just disruption. Secondly, on the border command, to reinforce what Tony was saying, data information here is really important. Migration policy generally, legal and illegal, has been bedeviled by very poor quality government data. It seems the new border security command is going to have limited ability to have operational control, but one thing I would like to see them have is powers to access and pull together data so that we can have a much better picture of...
Thank you. Yeah.
Are there any lessons from abroad that we're failing to learn at this point with this bill?
So, I mean, one thing that I have raised is the possibility for a biometric entry-exit system in this country, which we don't have, but at the weight, I do chair a lot of conferences around the world on border developments, border security, border technologies, if you like. Your face will become your passport sooner or later, sooner rather in some countries than here, in that we could, if we had the powers and authorities, capture just a digital image, which is a biometric of everybody entering and exiting the country, require the carriers to do likewise. We don't have physical embarkation controls. This is happening in America, it's happening in Dubai, it's happening in Singapore. We're going to Curacao, where they've got an actual walk-through border there now. And all it does is capture your face, it matches you to the API data that you've already got, uploads it into the cloud, recognises you straight away, you've got a more seamless border, but it'll give you things like proper figures on who's in this country and who isn't, your net migration figures will be a lot more accurate than they are currently, provided that we have the powers to capture and retain those facial images on everybody. That means UK passports, Irish passport, ETA and visa and permanent residence. But I think that's achievable, and I'd love to see that happening in this country.
Thank you very much.
Any more to add on that otherwise? Yeah.
Thank you, Minister. Minister Dame Angela Eagle.
Thank you very much. Migration Watch and their website, it says that you're worried about population projections and you worry about a significant fall in the percentage of the indigenous white British population. Can you explain what your worry is and define what the indigenous white population is, please?
First of all, I'm a first-generation migrant. I came here as an 8-year-old. I've been here since the mid-50s. The population, the immigrant ethnic minority element of the population in those days was something like 4%. In the 1951 census, it was actually 3.9%. It is now 25%, and that has substantially happened over the last 30 years. What worries me, if that's the right word, is the fact that there are people being added to the population, and migration is the only driver of population increase at the moment, which is what it is. And I know you've got David Coleman coming up next, and he will tell you a great deal more about what the likely evolution of the population and the demographic mix is going to be. That is my concern. Having arrived here as a migrant and accepted and joined this country and made it my own, I see it now changing very rapidly into something that the majority of people in this country do not want to happen.
Well, you still haven't told us what indigenous means, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. Will Forrester.
Thank you. Two questions, if I may. Carl, you talked about this bill doesn't have very much deterrence in it. What's your view on safe legal routes? So if we had safe legal routes, wouldn't that deter people having unsafe illegal routes? And Tony, you talked about sort of your perfect solution to borders. You didn't mention the cost of it. Have you got an idea of the setup cost and the running cost of it? Thank you.
So we do have safe and legal routes, is the short answer. The new Home Office immigration data that was published this morning pointed out that last year 79,000 people arrived from safe and legal routes. Since 2020 we've had about 550,000, maybe slightly more, arrive on safe and legal routes. That's Ukraine, Hong Kong, the Afghan resettlement schemes, new people arriving through UN programs and through Syria, and yet this doesn't stop the crossings. I think the fundamental problem is here there is always going to be more demand to come to this country than we would probably be willing to allow for in safe and legal routes. Just one stat on that. A couple of years ago, Gallup did a very wide-ranging poll of attitudes on migration and found that globally about 900 million adults would migrate given the opportunity. 30 million of those people, in fact, put Britain as their first choice. There is always going to be a longer queue to get in than we have capacity for in any one given time period, is my view.
I don't have a detailed financial breakdown for you, but I can say the direction of travel in the UK and around the world is to take away officers from the border and to automate a lot of the processes. We are doing that here already. We move, I think, more people through e-gates than any other country does. So this is an automated border which will in itself provide with reductions in the numbers of officers required to do frontline routine tasks, which they really don't want to do, and enable them to target those people that they really want to focus on. So I think probably, if you were to do that in detail analysis, you'd probably find it would be cost neutral in the end.
Okay. If I may, one quick follow-up. Thank you for the answer, Cole. Are you suggesting that we should have more schemes like the Ukrainian scheme to combat the small boats issue?
I don't think it combats. I don't think it is a disincentive. I think the ideal solution is once we have control over and small boats, and therefore who's coming into this country. We can have a serious conversation about expanding safe and legal routes if we want, and what that might look like, and what other parts of the world we might want to help. But I think so much resource is now sucked up dealing with the downstream consequences of the channel crossings, the hotel bills, etc. This is a sequence of things. I don't think a safe and legal route in itself is in any way a disincentive to trying to come.
Thank you. Jade Bottrill.
Thanks, Chair. All three of you have expressed disappointment to seeing us scrap the Rwanda scheme as part of this bill. Can I just ask, what part of the 700 million spent by the previous government do you think was good value for money for the taxpayer?
I don't think any of it was good value for money for the taxpayer, was it? I mean, the history speaks for itself and the record, but I think we need to think why it didn't work. I think we need to look at the reasoning behind why it took 3 years, really, to try and get this process going. There was an awful lot of work done in Rwanda and in the Home Office, I know, to try and make this happen, but it was subject to continual legal challenges. And those legal challenges were made both in Europe and in the domestic ports and by judicial reviews. There were flights lined up on a number of occasions that did not happen, and a lot of money was therefore wasted in the process. The other point, I'm not a big fan of the Illegal Migration Act, actually. I think some of it was cumbersome because it put all of the eggs in the Rwanda basket. Rwanda was a limited programme. Obviously, we could not send everybody to Rwanda, but under the NABA, you had the option to triage and put some people into the Rwanda bucket if you wanted to. Those hard country, removers where you couldn't remove them anywhere else, you had that option, but you could still do what you're doing now and process people from places like Turkey and Albania and put them through the asylum system and return them to source. I think losing that triage option is going to be a big drawback, and it's going to cost a lot more money in the long run because the intake will continue to come, and then you'll have to rack up the associated asylum costs, accommodation costs and settlement costs that will run along with that.
I would add to that, value compared to what? There's one argument around the counterfactuals if you get deterrence. But also I would refer to the OBR's analysis last summer on the fiscal impacts of migration. And they estimate that a low-skilled migrant, or low-wage migrant as they call it, will represent a lifetime net fiscal cost to the taxpayer of around £600,000. We know from analysis in Denmark and the Netherlands and other European countries that asylum seekers' lifetime fiscal costs tend to be steeper than that. But even on the basis of the OBR analysis, you say everyone will end up in work. If you're getting 35,000 people across the year, which is roughly where we were last year, at that sort of cost range, 50, 60 billion pounds of lifetime cost. So compared to that, 700 billion pounds. It depends on what timescale you're looking over.
Thank you. Pete Wishart.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering if the panel would agree with me that there's going to be increasing demand to come to the UK from right across the world. We're not going to deal with war-torn situations. We're not going to deal with oppression and absolute poverty. So people are going to continue to move in. The movement of peoples has never been so profound as it has been in the last decade. So I don't know exactly how you plan to stop that, but if I'm unfairly characterising your view, you could correct me, but your view is it shouldn't get into the UK and they should be stopped either in the sea or the minute they arrive in the UK, and at that point they should be booted out to somewhere, if that's not Rwanda, some other favourable other country, or just put back to country of source. Is that roughly your view? Just shake your head or nod. Is that roughly your view? Yeah. Okay, that's fine. So I'm just wondering, have you even the slightest scintilla of sympathy, compassion and concern about these poor, wretched souls who end up on our shores with absolutely nothing, that have fled oppression, warfare and extreme poverty?
So, I mean, if I can come back, I do have sympathy with them. I do sympathise. I would probably, many of us I suspect would do the same thing. My issue is they have travelled through a great many countries to make it to the UK. We used to have the UNHCR resettlement programme when we did have control of our borders. I was a big fan of that. I went to Canada and studied it for 3 years, where you are actually searching the world, working with the UNHCR to identify the most vulnerable people and set a cap on the numbers that you can take. And that was going in Canada, that was going in Australia, the UK. You look at the UNHCR website and see the numbers of people that are going through that programme now. They're not getting resettled, and the reason they're not is because the business model's been taken over by the smugglers, and that's why we're getting large numbers of young men who can afford to cross multiple borders and pay smugglers to get here. So I would like to see a return to the system where we have got control of those irregular routes, and then we can start looking, as Carl said, at reintroducing the UNHCR resettlement programs, go to the UNHCR and take a certain quota into the UK in a managed way.
There are, just out of Syria recently, out of Gaza, there are going to be potentially 2 million people who would like some comfort. So they would like to move to somewhere a bit more convivial than Gaza is at the moment. But why is it, if I may ask the question, why is it assumed that because people like us advocate control and discouraging people a lot of the time from risking their lives, not just across the channel, but by living rough as they do, why is discouraging them from coming in some way, inhuman and insensitive and unkind?
Asking your response to the people who arrive on the shores, whether you feel empathy, compassion, or concern about
we do, and even in my day as an immigration officer 50 years ago, that was exactly what we did. Tony, he rose to run the show, but I would argue that we had far more leeway in the 70s as individual immigration officers, humble immigration officers, very junior. We were properly trained and we were monitored, and we did things in a way that was entirely within the law, and we dealt with people humanely. That doesn't mean that won't happen because we're saying, no, you shouldn't jump into a dinghy and make your way over here.
Thank you. Joe White.
Thank you, Chair. From the moment that the Rwanda deal was signed until the moment it was scrapped, 84,000 people arrived here on boats. So how can you define that as a deterrent?
Go on, you go, then I'll catch up with the question, because I didn't quite hear.
We may well be saying the same thing, but I mean the question was, the Rwanda plan didn't deter anybody because we still had 84,000. I think the reason for that is because it was never in fact implemented. So smugglers, the intelligence coming across from Calais was that smugglers and the migrants did never believe that it was going to happen. But once it became clearer that the Safety of Rwanda Act had passed, and it may well have become a reality, then there was intelligence to suggest that some people were thinking twice about getting into dinghies, some displacement into Ireland as a result of that. But of course we'll never know now because we never actually implemented it. What I would have liked to see, I know we had a change of government, and clearly the new government made it very clear they were going to abolish the Rwanda plan, so we are where we are. But I would have liked to have seen an opportunity to see what would have happened if we had started at least some removals. We had flights ready to go. If we had started some removals, what that impact would have had on the incoming population. And I'm afraid we will never know now. So yes, clearly we didn't actually remove hardly anybody to Rwanda in the end. I accept that. But I would have liked to at least have seen us try to do that to see if it had an impact.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would also say that it was never going to be the solution. It wasn't going to be the way to stop those people jumping into boats coming across, but it was going to help. There needed to be other changes, and I would argue that the ECHR, which we're not going to resolve from any time soon, I appreciate that, but while that is there, then it makes it very difficult to be certain that people will be dissuaded. Some will be, and some would have been, and we know that some were already being deterred, and I'm afraid it was a pity that the Rwanda deal went.
A bit today about the clauses. I think they're 13.3 and 14.4, exempting NGOs from criminal charges for helping asylum seekers cross the channel. What do you think of those?
Well, I think if we are talking about what deterrence we might need or what pull factors there are, clearly having charities that are in some circumstances facilitating people crossing the channel is going to be an extra pull factor. Probably a small one in the grand scheme of things, but it is there. And what I'm thinking of here are organisations such as Care for Calais, who are providing, for example, phone charging services to migrants who are waiting in the sand dunes and the camps around the beaches where the crossings are made. They can recharge their phones, then they are therefore in contact with the smuggling gangs. So I think there is a hole in the system that needs to be closed, and I don't think this bill does it.
I just wanted to say that I think there are charities and charities. There are different charities that some of them are not in any way involved in facilitation. It's a pure care in the community, exercise function in Calais. But I think there are other charities who are a little bit more mischievous, who might be helping people with their, what to say when you're near the border, how to present your asylum claim, how to get to a beach which might not be patrolled, which I think are a bit more mischievous. So I think I'd like to see more work done on that.
Thank you. Becky Gittins.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much to the panel for your spirited contributions so far. We obviously know that the processing of asylum claims ground to a halt under the previous government, due in part to the Rwanda scheme and to the IAM. That being the route that, other than the 4 that went to Rwanda, people were either granted asylum or returned to the country from which they came. We also know the impact of the asylum system sort of grinding to a halt on our communities. Massive influx of people being placed in for sort of indefinite periods in asylum hotels, and also the impact that this had on our local authorities and their ability to therefore provide services to the rest of our community. Given that this bill does clearly provide a deterrent to smugglers and the business around people smuggling, the criminal gangs in the channel, in the way of disrupting their activity, greater expense, etc. Why is it that we've still heard representations from a few of our, well, I think two or three of you outright said, but all seem to be broadly supportive of Rwanda. Why, given those facts, do you still think it's a mistake to be repealing those acts within this bill?
There's a Nationality and Borders Act of 2022, there's the Illegal Migration Act of 2023. I said earlier on, I was not a great fan of the IMA because of the very reasons that you stated, because it brought in clauses, it brought in the ban too early, so people were being banned from re-entering this country before we'd even removed them. And that was impacting on port cases. It was a hugely difficult time because that law actually put all of the eggs in the Rwanda basket, and as you say, left increasing numbers of boat people were being served with notice that you're going to Rwanda when they were never going to go to Rwanda. They were going into the system you described, so I don't think that was a very good idea. I think what happened with the NABA, if we'd have put the IMA to one side and the duty to remove, and we'd have stuck with NABA, and then we had SORA, the safety of SORA would have turbocharged NABA, and it would have given you that triage option to either accept people into your asylum system quickly and process them, which you're doing now, but you could have done that with some of them. But for the others, where you wanted to make a point that it's not okay to come across in a small boat and get to stay in the UK, you could have sent some of them to Rwanda. And that's, I think, what we could have done under NABA and SORA, and I think the IMA disrupted that. That's my view.
Okay.
And I just add to that, I suppose the asylum backlog of inadmissible people is a function of the disjunction between different parts of the legislation, the implementation moving at different speeds. Obviously, the intention at the beginning was we'd have the flights going off in, I think it was January 2023, when the ECHR injunction stopped the first flight, and I think that derailed it. And you could have had conceivably a situation where a combination of some offshoring and the deterrent effect of that would have meant the backlog of inadmissible cases did not grow. Obviously, the fact that then Rwanda got stalled through the courts for a couple of years and then just didn't happen at all meant inevitably that mounting was going to increase. And that was at that point locked in.
Thank you. Mike Tapp.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions for Mr. Smith, if you will. Going back to some of your earlier comments, you spoke about quite enthusiastically biometric collection at the borders. Are you aware that we're looking at the new entry-exit system with biometric collection coming in this year? That's the first question. The second, you spoke quite negatively about the Border Security Command. Now, I believe from your profile that you retired in 2013, is that correct? Now, 12 years on, we've had the DG of the National Crime Agency in before you, who spoke very enthusiastically about the Border Security Command and this bill. Have you spoken to them since you retired?
No, I haven't spoken to the DG of the National Crime Agency. I'm retired, so probably different constraints apply to what I can say to what you can say when you're still working for the government. But I mean, I would say that I am very close to Border Force Immigration Enforcement, a lot of my former colleagues who are still working. I did go out on the boats with them last year. I'm very much in touch with what's going on there. I worked under the UK Border Agency. We had agency status. We were arm's length from government. I had specific removal targets that I had to deliver. I had end-to-end teams. I had front-end teams, asylum teams, immigration enforcement teams in a region working a case from start to finish with quite rigorous case conclusion targets. So I liked that system because I thought it worked. It got broken up into silos. We now have Directors General for Border Force, Immigration Enforcement, Migration and Borders, Homeland Security. Now we're putting another one in for Border Security Command. I think that's quite a jumbled mirage of civil servants. If you've got the crime agency, and that's NCA, the police, and the security services. It's a really so I can see why you want a coordinator. I can see why you want a coordinator. That's what he is, though. He's not commander. I was gold commander for the UKBA London 2012 Olympic. I was in charge basically. I had a Home Secretary. Obviously, I was answering to her on decision making, but it came to me because I had command over all those units. Now you haven't because you've got. The Home Office is very gradist, and you've got Directors General for a whole different bunch of silos. It's going to be a heck of a job for the new security commander to actually direct activities on those agencies that have other priorities and other responsibilities, I think. So that's why I would like to see them have agency powers, arrest powers, enforcement powers, and to have a whole look at that whole structure about border force enforcement, migration and borders, and see, is this too unwieldy? And can we have a more streamlined process where we have got somebody calling the shots?
Thank you. Obviously differing to those that are currently serving. And on the biometric checks, are you aware that we've got a new system?
So I know you've got an order coming in next week which does allow biometrics to be captured. That's going through, but I don't think it goes far enough.
So there's a new entry-exit system Europe-wide which will be implemented.
Oh, the EU one?
Yeah,
yeah, exactly, the EES system, that's what I mean. So the EES
here at our borders.
No, we're not.
Yes, we are.
Well, we haven't got an entry-exit system. We have
so
not
that's
got a
coming in
biometric
this year.
entry. No, we haven't. We've not got a biometric entry-exit system. The EU are bringing in EES, the entry-exit system, which means Brits will have to give their biometrics on entry and exit. We're bringing in the ETA, an electronic travel authority, but that's different to an entry-exit system.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Hayes.
Thank you, Chair. Questions for Mr. Williams. Sorry, is it Dr. Williams? No, okay, sorry, Mr. Williams then. So I spoke with Dr. Walsh in a previous testimony, and I asked him the question whether he thought it was difficult to make emphatic assessments of the fiscal burden of migration given the quality of the data available. There's a February 2025 report which you've authored, which makes broadly the same points about some of the quality gaps that are there. I'd welcome you talking a little bit about the gaps in that data, which obviously affects the ability to make emphatic assessments. And then I also wanted to ask you about that report. So in a previous answer, you raised the importance of counterfactuals. In your report, did you consider counterfactuals in reaching your overall recommendations and assessments, such as the fact that migrants might move up the wage and skills distribution, that they won't always remain at low pay, that in the absence of these migrant workers, there would need to be other people who could do their work, for instance, in the health and care settings? Did you consider the economic impacts of having nobody in those roles to do that health and care, and whether that would affect the worklessness in our country? Did you consider things like whether there was a reallocation of British workers into higher skill and higher wage jobs as a consequence of those migrant workers, and maybe things like the economic impacts of potentially more people doing unpaid care because there was a lack of paid carers? Now, I ask these questions not because I feel like we should rely on migrant workers. I don't. But I ask these questions because your report has been lauded by the Shadow Home Secretary and other Conservative members of Parliament, and I want to make sure that if it is being used as a point of reference, that the data and the assessments have got integrity. Mm-hmm. And I wonder whether, if you were to consider those counterfactuals, it might affect what your report says.
Yes. So, first point, we are talking about the indefinite leave to remain report that came out a couple of months ago, not the large report from last year.
Oh, I've forgotten the name of it. Here to Stay?
Yes, that's the one, yes.
That's the one.
Okay, so that is purely looking at fiscal impact. There is some analysis, which I can reference in a minute, on the broader economic picture in the previous report, but this was more tightly focused in.
But inevitably the counterfactuals would have an impact on the fiscal burden carried by the state.
Indeed, yes. And the counterfactuals we did think about were different levels of stay rates and different rates among different wage profiles. In terms of migrants earning more as they go through the system, that clearly does happen to some extent, whether through out-migration or through career progression. In conducting that analysis, we stuck to the fiscal profiles used by the OBR, because, as you say, the data quality around this is fairly poor, and that was the best there was, rather than trying to construct our own sort of, this will be the ingoings and outgoings as they progress over their life course in the UK. And the OBR does model it by age, so they do capture the different sort of wage contributions that you make at different points in your life, which will be higher in some points and lower in others, and they do capture the different burdens of, for example, healthcare in old age. In terms of the quality of the data, yes, I'm really glad you phrased that. I think we've repeatedly pointed out, as has the Government Bank of England and the ONS, that the labour force survey is very broken. And I think in that report and previous reports, we have always pushed on the point that we need better data. Everyone needs better data. And this is in this one area where I think there is broad consensus, whether you're a restrictionist or you want more migration or whatever else. The standard reference here is to Denmark and the Netherlands.
And I guess, would you feel cautious about members of Parliament emphatically assessing that there would be a fiscal burden of 234 billion over the lifetime, as your report concludes, based on those concerns that you have about data, but also the fact that consideration of some of those counterfactuals, and there could be many, many more I list, would actually impact on that overall figure?
The report is very clear about the assumptions we've made at various points and the unknowns. And with any modelling exercise, whether it's you're conducting a fiscal model of an effect of a tax change or whatever else, you have to make assumptions about reasonable assumptions.
We've got 20 seconds left. Sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah. You didn't have to stop straight away. We just have 20
in which
seconds.
case, carry on.
Thank you very much. Order. That brings us to the end of the time allocated for the committee to ask questions. On behalf of the committee, I thank our witnesses for their evidence. Thank you very much.